I'm John Bergman. Thanks for joining us on the Climbing Business Journal podcast today. With these episodes and at CBJ in general, we work to inform, to connect, and to inspire people who work in and with climbing businesses. And I think that's a good lead-in to today's guest, which is Dave Hudson, because Dave has a lot of information and knowledge to impart. As you will hear, Dave has been involved in climbing business for a long time, specifically on the youth coaching and organizational and competition judging sides of things. And his involvement in all that actually predates the IFSC, it predates USA Climbing, it even predates most gyms having viable youth programs. But what's really cool is that Dave hasn't planted his feet in the history of the industry. As you'll hear, he's continued to evolve, and he's got an eye to where things might be going in the years to come. Dave's currently the youth manager at First Ascent. He's also the head coach there. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dave Hudson. Essential Climbing is a new name for a group of brands that have served climbers, gyms, and home walls for decades. They distribute premium, quality polyurethane holds manufactured at Aragon, import fiberglass macros and wood volumes, have a line of patented adjustable walls, and even design and install custom climbing walls and padded floors. Their brands include Kumiki, Everactive, Expression, Squadra, Lapis, and Axis. Learn more at essentialclimbing.com. True Blue is the only auto belay with magnetic braking. They're proud to be the official auto belay of USA Climbing, and True Blues can be found on climbing walls across the world. Their one-of-a-kind, no-delay belay program will automatically ship you a ready-to-hang True Blue before your current one is due for service. Learn more at headrushtech.com. First of all, I thought it might be really interesting if you could go over a bit of your background.
Sure. It's been a long time since I've been in the industry. So I started maybe back in the late 80s. So there were very few gyms in the country, and I kind of talked my way. I was living in New York working in advertising and kind of talked my way into a training clinic for it wasn't the IFSC then, it was under the UIAA at the Snowbird International World Cup, the first World Cup in the US in '88. So I went out there and got trained as an international judge, which was pretty funny because I really didn't know that much about climbing at the time. But it was an amazing experience and really got me addicted to climbing. Quit my job, spent some time traveling out west, and then got involved in the industry proper by managing what was at the time the biggest indoor wall in the world, which is the Sporting Club. It's a health club in Chicago. And the wall went up kind of the 7 stories of an atrium, elevator atrium on the backside. So it was like a 105-foot tall wall. And we actually did host some competitions back then. Of course, it was really a nascent industry, and like nobody knew who was going to actually run it. So USA Climbing didn't exist. People were kind of vying for position on who might be the governing body at the time. And so we did something called the Danskins Women's National Championship there way back in the day, and a couple other events. It was really interesting. From there, it just kind of evolved. I managed some other gyms out in Salt Lake City, Rock Creation, one of the first bigger gym chains on the Black Diamond campus, and some other health club walls. And when I was back in Chicago, I started working in a really tiny bouldering gym in the basement of a gymnastics gym. And I always it was kind of a dungeon, which everyone will say it was a dungeon. And it's still going on, one of the oldest gyms in the country, actually. So I know I've seen some stories done on like TVA and Chattanooga and how old that was, but that's not even nearly as old as Hidden Peak, because the person who bought out instead of working at TVA, Kasha Pietras, is one of my initial teen kids when she was 8 years old. So Hidden Peak is much older. So it's still there. You know, it started probably in '85, and they kind of moved to a new gymnastics location. I took it over in around 1990. And at that time, it was still very new. So USAC did not exist. It was still kind of, people were juggling for control a bit. So Jeannie Niemer out in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, started the JCCA, Junior Competition Climbing Association. And I got involved with that and started the Midwest region, because it was only local, kind of, regional. And then she just kind of recruited people to do other regions around the country. And after a few years, that was national, only rope climbing, no bouldering. And there was no youth bouldering for Worlds as well in Europe. And then the same thing happened with bouldering. EBS, Scott Rennick, started that. And then that turned to ABS, which was extremely successful. And we did some comps for them and just kind of continued to get involved. So I was on the board for a little bit for the JCCA. That turned into the USCCA. Then the PCA, which is kind of a big comp organization out of Salt Lake City, Mike Beck and Mike Call and some of those guys, Black Diamond people, and the Front, which was one of the early gyms in the country. It all kind of settled out when ABS merged. Ann Worley, Moulter, kind of bought it out, and it all merged together. I'm not sure what year that was, early mid 90s, into the USAC. And then it's been kind of going strong since then. We've had an actual national governing body. There are reports to the North American Council, reports to the IFSC, and sends kids to Worlds, et cetera. So yeah, that's kind of my history. And I stayed at that little gym training climbers for 18 years, and put some national champions out of that little gym. Kasia Pietras won nationals back in the day. Still a very, very strong climber. Now is in the industry, managing out in Boston climbing gyms. Isabel Faust, who's also kind of a pro boulder, and Michaela Kirsch, Mike O'Rourke trained with us for a little bit in there. So it was a great little space. It was about 900 square feet, 1,000 square feet, about 15 feet tall, chopped rubber landing surface. But it was just a really fun, really high energy place to be. And it was great because, managing it's almost a co-op-y feeling place. I got to do whatever I wanted with the kids in terms of training. So that was a huge flexibility. So from there, I moved on. Finally, we had a big gym open in Chicago. No one could solve that problem. So First Ascent, which I'm one of the founders of now, opened in 2015 with our first location. We now have 7. And BKB is here as well. And then Movement came here, which I'm sure you know. So it's really growing in Chicago. But at the time, there was just nothing but a couple of health club walls and Hidden Peak. So it's nice to see it grow the way it has and provide careers for people. And it's just a really different world now.
You've seen it all. There's a lot that I would love to get into in depth, but I guess one of the overarching questions, I'd love to hear you riff on this a bit, is
sure.
As a Midwesterner myself, it's nice to hear about your own contributions to the Midwest and your involvement in the Midwest and the Midwest foothold in this competition climbing history. And you referenced Scott Rennick as well. I think it's easy for people to just assume that Colorado and Utah and maybe Oregon have always been the most important places, because they've certainly held significant importance in more recent years with the headquarters of these various organizations and stuff. And yet,
sure,
as your history attests, the Midwest really played a huge part in the history of the American comp scene and the history of the American gym scene.
It really did. I mean, once it kind of took off, once we had regions around the country after Jeannie started JCCA, it was strong everywhere. And if you look at the stats, it kind of continues to be the case. So when you do analysis, which USAC has done, and I've done just personally, it's easy to do, who's on our national team over the last 10 or 15 years, who's podiuming, it's relatively spread out around the country. So you see a pretty even percentage of national team members for the youth, from Colorado, New Mexico, California, and it varies. It's cyclical in a way, but it's really, there have been a lot from the Midwest. There have been a ton of great, strong youth climbers out of Minnesota with Alex Johnson and other people like that, and out of Planet Rock. Planet Rock has produced tons out of Detroit, out of Ann Arbor and Detroit, Detroit suburb, of top climbers. And even Chicago. So it really has been kind of spread around. So it's interesting. It seems like it's focused out there. And size-wise, like last year, we were the largest region in USAC by far. We had the most number of kids signed up, which was our And they dumped a couple of states out of our region because it was too big the year before. So we actually moved out. We used to compete against Hoosier Heights in Indiana, a very big team, and Planet Rock, a huge team. And they moved that and rearranged the regions. And now we're just kind of Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota. And I think we go out to Oklahoma and those areas, but we're still the largest region. So it's really been centered everywhere. And you've seen just top climbers come out of all parts of the country, East Coast and the Mid-South. Florida and Atlanta produced a lot of good climbers. Team Texas, of course, produced tons of great climbers with Coach Kyle Blink Scales down there. But it has been surprising. People just who don't follow it just think it's like Boulder, Front Range area, and now Salt Lake. But for youth, especially, that's not really the case.
My working theory has always been that I think in the Midwest, I don't want to shortchange any of the great outdoor climbing that is available here in the Midwest, because obviously with Red River Gorge and on, there's plenty of great real rock. Right. But there's no denying the fact that it's a different kind of access when you're talking about being in Colorado or Utah compared to being in Indiana or Illinois or Kentucky or something like that. And so I've always thought that maybe one of the reasons why the gym scene did really thrive here and continues to thrive here in the Midwest is because for a lot of people, if you want to go climbing, gyms are maybe not the only option, but certainly the quickest and easiest option. You don't have to drive hours and hours to get to the outdoor crag or something like that. You can just go right downtown and there's a gym there. And I think that it's been that way since the mid 90s, really.
Yeah, that's exactly true. So there's very little climbing close by. Devil's Lake is kind of a classic area, but there's not much there. I mean, it's trad climbing or rigging a top rope from above. You have access to the top of the cliff. And bouldering has developed there a little bit in the last 10 years, kind of in a talus field. John Gill actually put up some classic boulders back in the day. But that's still 3 hours, and it's not modern sport climbing. So to go to a true modern area, it's the Red River Gorge, and that's, a 7-hour trip, depending on traffic. So that's a long, hard weekend. And so especially for youth, we have so many kids on the team over the years who have just never been outdoor climbing. So really gyms are their access. And for adults too, if it's not the main access, it's at least a starting point where, go to Boulder or Salt Lake, and lots of people get into it by going with a friend or a guide or somebody. So they start outside and they may access the gyms in the off season, but generally everything starts in the gyms in the Midwest for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how the youth programming is organized at First Ascent? Because obviously there are multiple First Ascent gyms, and since it is places like Chicago and whatnot, there's a lot of high traffic moving through those gyms. So can you just explain, how it all comes together?
Sure. So we have a strong rec program like most gyms do. So we kind of offer age group rec classes, little scramblers, little spider monkeys, little 4 and 5-year-old scramblers up through stone masters, these different age groups. And then from there, we also have a competitive team. And since I came from Hidden Peak with the team, we kind of were able to start with a strong, large team on day one. So really, we also, a lot of the Evanston Athletic Club and other health club walls that had teams, smaller teams, those employees came to First Ascent too when a gym finally opened. So a lot of those kids came with. So, the very first year we probably had 35 kids on our climbing team. And that evolved very quickly up to about 100. So we have 5 levels. We have a pre-team, which is kind of a transition from rec classes into the team program, a little bit more training, learning how to train a bit. And then we have development team and teenage teams. So those are more casual, 2 days a week. And then elite development team, EDT, and the elite team, which train 3 days a week, plus, an extra 1 or 2 on their own usually. And those have been strong since the beginning, but they've grown. So we have maybe 100 in the program total, maybe 30 on the elite team. And obviously the lower levels change year to year. Kids move up from, rec classes to development team or development team to EDT, and people leave, people move, switch around. But that's kind of how we're scheduled. So we're 5 days a week, but kind of 2 days for the lower programs, 3 days for the upper programs. The rec classes have been tough since COVID. We had a fantastic rec program with probably, 150, anywhere from 150 to 180 kids in it at any time. So on a Saturday morning, we might have, 5 Gramblers classes running at 9 in the morning and 5 Rock Warriors at 10 in the morning. But that's been really difficult since COVID. And it's not so much that climbers, the kids aren't there, it's that we can't get the instructors. So as you probably heard, you listen to the news that, from Subways to Walmarts to climbing gyms, it's been really difficult with staffing for everyone the last 2 years. And we're only going to hire someone who's very qualified and very good with the kids. And we just have trouble getting them. So we're significantly smaller as a rec program, but we hope to get that back up to pre-COVID levels soon.
Yeah, that's been something that we've tracked at CBJ in really all aspects of the industry, from coaches to people working at the front desk and whatnot. Yep. And it's a tricky thing because, like you said, just like the rest of the country, it's not like there's an easy solution to that. And especially with something like coaches, where you do have to have some significant credentials, not to mention there's certain responsibilities the gym has to vet people if they're going to be working with kids and all that. So that is a real challenge for sure.
It is. It's been difficult. And it's been across the board at our gyms and across the board in terms of job titles. So from setters to coaches or rec instructors to basically our front desk staff, our hospitality staff. It's kind of, in the hospitality staff, we expect a turnover, and at least we're getting constant influx of qualified people that we can look at and hopefully hire, and fill those spots. It's still been a challenge, but for instructors for kids, it's just much harder because we have fewer applicants and we're just not accepting nearly as many as qualified that we really want to work with the program. So,
well, speaking of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember this, but the last time you and I talked at length was leading up to the Olympics. I was working on a piece for Climbing Magazine, and we were speculating what type of impact will the Olympics have on youth teams, youth programming, participation, all of that stuff. That was pre-pandemic, so obviously that threw a whole other X factor into the mix.
Right.
But since the Olympics, have you noticed there is that, as expected or as predicted, uptick in interest in families that saw the Olympics, saw climbing in the Olympics, and then kind of came to the gym wanting to try it after that?
I'll be honest. It's really hard to judge that because of COVID. So, take a look at our rec numbers, which of course would be the people who are like, oh, this is cool. I just saw this. I want to try it, kind of entry level. They have not gone up, but I think a lot of that is COVID. Like I said, we do have this wait list of kids that want to take classes, and we just don't have classes to offer them. But honestly, I have not seen it. I have not seen a huge influx of people who saw the Olympics and said, hey, I want to come try that. It seems to be just sort of the natural, organic growth that we see of people saying, hey, that sounds fun. I heard about it, or somebody told me about it, or they saw we don't do a lot of advertising. We do, basically social media and some basic marketing. Like most gyms, we're not spending big dollars on big advertising. And come in and try it and like the experience or don't like the experience. And that's been the same with kind of like kids and families as well. So from my perspective, I think I don't have any data on it, but it seems like it's stayed about constant. I've not seen a huge influx, and I've not heard people mention to me that they saw it on the Olympics per se.
That's been one of the big questions that we've asked is, did we overestimate the impact that the Olympics was going to have? I don't think we'll be able to answer that probably for several years.
Right.
But it is something that it's been interesting and difficult to track because it's so coupled with the pandemic and all of that stuff.
I think, climbers watched climbing in the Olympics, kids who climb and adults who climb, and they watch the World Cups too, streaming, right? If they're really into it, like my kids will watch the World Cups, the elite team kids. Now the lower level kids don't watch it, don't even really know there are World Cups. And then as far as general population, I just don't think enough people saw it and said, hey, I'm going to go try that. I'm going to look up a climbing gym, see what's in my community and go try it, any more than we normally see people looking up something fun to do, and they find a climbing gym and they come try it with their family. So we'll see how that evolves. I think, maybe if it gets a little higher profile, a little more coverage and better time slots, that sort of thing, that you might have a little bit more of that.
I'm glad you said we'll see how it's evolved because how it evolves, because I want to talk about evolution. Before we look forward, though, let's look like a little backwards. If you look back at the past, maybe 10 years or 5 years, what has been the biggest evolution in youth programming?
That's a good question. I think the level of coaching has really increased. So I think that you're seeing a lot more kids in a lot more parts of the country having access to great coaching and great programs. I think the number of gyms that support that have increased. So 10 or 15 years ago, you had gyms that really bought into it and really spent money on coaches and on developing a program, which is a significant investment with a very little return or no return at first. You really have to make that investment and get someone to come to your gym and to stay and to build a program. And so you saw a handful of gyms taken out, noticeably, but, obviously Team ABC or Vertical World or Team Texas with Kyle, those sorts of gyms. But a lot of gyms just didn't. They just didn't do it. So like let's say in Minnesota, it wasn't that as supported. And so a lot of those great climbers in Minnesota trained in Woody's and home walls. I mean, Alex Johnson trained at VE, but also mostly out of a home wall and home gym. And Tyler Hack, some other really strong people from up there too. So I think that's changed. I think most gyms realize the importance and significance of building a team and adding that into their revenue stream for one, but also it's really good marketing as well. And it's just, and they just want to support the sport and see the sport grow too. So they just kind of feel like it's an integral part of the sport that they need to participate in. So that's grown, and the number of coaches has grown. And I think, another thing is we're on our second generation of coaches. So a lot of the kids I coached are coaching. So, Kasha is actually in a management position. Michaela does kind of private training off and on, but we just hired another kid from Planet Rock who all of these original kids I've been talking about competed against. Very good climber named Tyler Hack. We just hired him as our head setter at our new Arlington location. So I'm seeing this second generation of setters and coaches that were coached in a program before, and that we didn't have that before. So it was first generation coaches kind of trying to figure it out as they go with those kids. Now those kids have been through a program for 10 or 12 years, gone through college, and they're coming out and they're working in the industry, and they have a tremendous amount more knowledge about how to coach somebody, how to train them, and how to deal with competitions at a higher level as well. So I think that's one of the biggest changes I've seen, as well as just overall numbers, I think, as well. And then USA Climbing, I think, has made a strong change. And there's always a push-pull between dealing with the grassroots and growing the grassroots and getting an 8-year-old who maybe the farthest they'll go is regionals and just wants to enjoy it and have a format that's enjoyable for them and have some success and kind of something that seems like it's geared for them. And then also have Colin Duffy and promote the Olympic team. And, and if you look at their website in the remodel in the last year, it's very professional and corporate. And on the front page, it's always streaming on who won the World Cup and Olympics and what medals do we get. And I think that's great. But like I said, there's that push-pull between grassroots and between promoting at a really high-end level, like this is an Olympic level sport, and we want to participate at that level. So I think that kind of push has really added to the top climbers having the ability to get the resources they need more and to train more and to compete at the highest level. So that's definitely a change I've seen too.
Yeah. How do you handle that split, that dichotomy? Because I'll try to explain how I see it and the uniqueness of the comp scene in other sports. Like, let's just take baseball or something.
Right.
There is a rec program or a little league program, but eventually the kids that just want to do it recreationally kind of, they sort of fall off. And eventually it does funnel into this more elite track as the sole track, right? It's then you play in middle school, and then you play in high school. And then if you're good enough, you play in college. And like there aren't many rec high school baseball players, right? Like if you play, you're good and you play on the school team. Whereas climbing, now we have that Olympic track for the best of the best, but we also still have that rec track. And you don't want those rec kids to lose that, even if they know that as they get older, they're never going to be Olympic caliber. You still want them to compete in comps, and you still want to hold comps and have programming that keeps them involved in the youth scene. So it's very unique. Climbing has these two tiers. Yes. You almost have to serve them equally.
And I think that's a challenge that USA Climbing has been struggling with a little bit. I think it's really hard to provide grassroots support and grow your membership base, and then provide for your high end athletes and fund them to go to the Olympics and go to World Cups and compete, and promote them. And I think they're coming close to that inflection point where they're trying to do both. Because if you don't have enough grassroots people in the sport, and a base in your sport, you're not going to support the higher end athletes in the sport, right? On the other hand, if you don't support the high end athletes, they're not going to do well in the international competitions. They're not even going to get to go over there. They won't have the money. They need the funding just to be able to travel and attend these, and they have trouble doing that. I don't know when that. I think we're close to that inflection point. I don't know where it is. I don't think we're quite there yet. But at some point, you're going to have two tracks, I believe. So I grew up as a gymnast a bit, and gymnastics is the exact same way. And when you compete as a gymnast, there's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, but up to level 10, and females go up and males go down for some reason, or vice versa. And when you go to competitions, you're like, oh, I'm competing as a level 4 gymnast in 7 to 9 years old. Oh, I'm a level 5, 11 to 13-year-old. So you're only competing against people who are basically of your ability. So they've already broken you down into ability. There's nothing like that in climbing. In climbing, when you come to regional championships, there's quite likely a national team member in your category that's competing against, right? So we go just at the regional or divisional level, we're going to run into people who went to Worlds last year, who are national team members. It's all open, fully open, level 10, And I think at some point, they're going to have to split that. There's going to have to be sort of a more recreational track and a higher level track. I'm not sure how they would do that. I've thought about it a lot. I do not have any recommendations for them. It just seems like a really difficult thing to do. You have to have enough kids to support both, right? I mean, you have to kind of cross over that level. But it just seems like it's inevitable at some point there, because you're not going to want to have someone who is an 8-year-old who's brand new going to regional championships, and you've got, an 11 and under. There's a kid in the 11 under Team ABC. I forget his name. It slips my mind. He's climbing V10, V11, V12. He's training with the 16, 17-year-old boys on ABC, which are descending the hardest routes in the country. He's like 9 or 10 years old. So I think at some point that has to happen. I'm just not sure when and how they're going to do it. One thought is if they go to more of what other sports do, which is maybe more of a state-based kind of thing. So you got to go through conference and sectionals and to, state championship, and that feeds into USAC. I'm really not sure, but at some point it's going to eventually happen.
And I suppose, speaking of the different state modeling, I guess one logical answer or solution, although it's not an easy one, would be to get climbing integrated more into high schools as a high school sport, because then there would be this framework for every state, with the high school athletic association would have just what you said, a sectional and then a regional and then a state championship. And then maybe that would funnel into the national championships or something like that. Obviously, that takes infrastructure that isn't there right now in terms of climbing being offered at all these different schools and all that.
Yeah, that's true. However, it's become so popular in the last 15 years that almost again, this also speaks to access for people of color and underprivileged people. But at the higher, like in middle class communities, let's say in the northern suburbs here, almost every park district does have a wall, and many of the high schools have a wall. And then, of course, there are many private gyms like us who you could partner with to run programs at. There's still limited access, but it's pretty good. So it's possible. It would create a tremendous amount of infrastructure and buy-in, from Illinois High School State Athletic Association or whatever it's called, that sort of thing. But I see it happening. I know when we had bouldering nationals out in Colorado Springs, they were also hosting like their state championship or something at the same time at the gym down there. And I know, Denver Climbing League. There've been other, private things that are not formed in USA Climbing outside of that, but then kind of feed into it in an informal way. They're just things that people do, and they know that they could have fun at like the DCL when that was going on and really strong. And then some of them would compete at USAC at regional or divisional level and above. So it hasn't happened there yet, but I think the potential is there. It just would take a lot of organization and I think USAC would have to make a big push to help make that happen.
Yeah, I guess as you yourself, as someone who has seen this alphabet soup that's in the history of the U.S. comp
Yeah.
scene with the USCCA, JCCA, ABS, PCA, on and on. Do you think it would be, I hate to say easier, because none of this would be easy, but do you think it'd be easier for USA Climbing to do this, to do both tracks? Or is it a matter of USA Climbing maybe focuses on the Olympic track because they are the national governing body, and then another separate organization comes in and handles maybe the rec track? And I'm not to say that those aren't around. Like you said, there are, and there have been separate organizations like that. And there's even a kind of reformed JCCA and stuff like that. So which do you see as maybe the more logical way, if it's possible to pick one?
That's a great question. I think it could go either way. Yeah, I mean, I think it would take. It's a very big endeavor. It's a big undertaking if you want to start your own kind of series, recreational series that caters toward that lower end and make a national series. I think it would take somebody with a lot of ambition to take that on. It's possible. I think that's definitely possible. I think you'd have to have a really good relationship with USA Climbing, and they'd have to support each other. I also see USAC doing it. But I think what you would need to do that is kind of part of USAC and their staff would focus on the elite level kids and that sort of thing. You know what I mean? And another half. So it's, in a way, it's kind of, you're splitting USAC in two in a way. The other half, all that staff focuses on is kind of the other, the lower level series that's doing it. That's more grassroots and more recreational. And there's no reason they couldn't do that. That's definitely very possible. And, maybe you split the website. You just kind of divide it in two, basically, and give both of them the resources they need in terms of staffing and funding to grow that. I'm not sure USAC has enough funding to do that at this point. I know that's often a challenge for them too. They're a 501c3 nonprofit that generates a lot of money, obviously, from the membership dues and competition fees. But I think that they're looking to get some bigger sponsors. That's been a big challenge for Mark Norman, who's a new CEO, I know, and he seems to be doing quite well at it, honestly, signing on things like Prudential and other people. But I think that grassroots people say, I don't care about that. What do we worry about getting Prudential as a sponsor and doing these big announcements? But on the other hand, if they get enough of that and they have the funding, they could take on something as massive as starting an entire rec series that caters to a different end of the climbing spectrum of the kids out there, because it is going to be very resource intensive.
Yeah, and you had said that you would need enough kids to support it, which I totally agree. But I think also what that translates to is you need the parents to really get on board with it. And
yeah, I think the parents would be, because we do have a lot of problems. We send kids. We really encourage everyone to compete because we think it's a great way to teach life lessons. Like, we're very big on sort of the different PCA, the Positive Coaching Alliance, and work they've done, which is not climbing based. They do more work in basketball, football, baseball, a lot of pro athletes. And there are, they do, train 4 million kids a year or something like that going through. And it's just about creating a positive experience in youth sports for everybody, right? So make them a better athlete, make them a better person, and double goal coach, triple goal coach. It's a really great program, and we really think about that all the time. And we think that competition is a great way to teach life lessons to these kids and learn how to deal with disappointment, learn how to deal with successes, learn how to kind of manage all of those emotions and feelings that go on when you're in an environment that's slightly uncomfortable. That's a competition per se. So we try to get our little development team kids to go compete and just encourage them. And, it doesn't matter where they place. It's a matter of, did you have fun? Did you enjoy the climbs? Did you enjoy that new cool climb you got to climb on? And how'd you do on it? Did you solve something? Did you learn something new? And the parents love that. But what we do get a lot of complaints on is that we take those kids, let's say, outside of a QE, and they go to regionals, they sign up, and the climbs that have to be designed for our top youth D climbers or UC climbers, and they're good. Like I said, there might be a national team member. So it's like, oh, it's a V8, my 7-year-old's trying to get on this V8 and they're just learning what backstepping is or what flagging is. And it's really hard. So you do see some parents saying, hey, this is terrible. That was an awful experience. And we try to say, hey, we'll talk to the kids. We'll make them understand that, look, you did fantastic. It's just that these are designed for the best climbers in the country, And so if you can get 3 moves on this or get the zone on one boulder problem, that's terrific. That's amazing. We love to see that. But that's a hard sell to some of the new parents. So I think that they would be very supportive. We have half of our kids, even team level kids, not just rec kids, where the parents would be like, hey, this would be great if we had a level that was appropriate for my kid. It wasn't just open. They didn't have to compete against the other 11-year-olds on the team who are climbing V8.
It's interesting too, talking about the parents, and with this nod to the history, it may the JCCA, which you referenced in your own background, was formed by parents, right?
All
It was
parents,
exactly
yep.
what we're talking about. These parents noticed these issues that they were upset with, frustrated with, or they just wanted to tweak a little bit, and they decided to form their own organization. And so, hearing us talk about this now, it's kind of like, well, maybe what's old is new, and it could be the parents kind of organizing.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And they talk to us about that all the time. Like, hey, we'd love to see this. Does this happen? Is there some sort of, thing going on like this? And I'm like, well, no, unfortunately there's not, but, and like I said, in some parts of the country, there are small things that are developing where people do that. So Planet Rock has started the Planet Rock series a couple of years ago, and it's 3 events they're hosting. One of them is a sanctioned QE for bouldering, and the other 2 aren't. And you can win the overall series. Unfortunately, the only kids who are traveling or going to that are my top climbers, right? So it still is kind of the high end level. So it's not like a community comp, which, we have all the time, and all gyms have these community comps where it's like, hey, sign up for what's appropriate: rec, intermediate, advanced, open. What boulder grade do you climb? It's just not there yet for the kids.
Aside from these potential organizational evolutions, how else do you see youth comp climbing and comp climbing in general, and youth coaching and the gym scene? How do you see that evolving in the future?
I'd like to see something we try to do. And every time I try to do it, I realize there's a lack of resources, a lack of training, a lack of knowledge on my part, even after 30 years of kind of data-driven training. So my elbows, I kind of did the silly thing and overtrained for about 3 years and kind of ruined my elbows, and with typical medial epicondylitis, a typical climber's injury, and kind of stopped my climbing. So I don't do it very much anymore. And I've gotten into bike racing the last 10 or 12 years. And the data-driven research for someone who's a pro bike racer who races the Tour de France or something, or a runner or anything like that, it's unbelievable. It's like, you can't tap it all. It's like, there is so much, you could never even read all the research. I'd like to see more of that. And so every time I go to a coaching clinic that USAC puts on, or a great organization is Canada Strong. So that's an organization that's private now, but was formed by some of the top Canadian national team coaches and other people in the program. It's a much smaller program up there in general compared to USAC. And they've been putting on some great seminars, 2, 3, 4-day seminars on training, and bringing in fantastic people to talk. And that's just evolving. I'd like to see more of that. I think you're going to see more data-driven, research-driven training. So I think that you're going to see, rather than just like, hey, let's do a 4x4 today, right? Let's work on power dirts. Let's climb this. I think, and you're seeing more of that come out in books and other, right, things that you can follow too, Training for Climbing, and several different books that are out, but it's still pretty sparse. So I think that will evolve and bring it up to a higher level, what people can achieve. So they're going to start focusing on those higher levels of training that's data driven. They're going to focus on things like nutrition, all these little things that like have not really been done in the past. I think the formats will continue to evolve too. That's something I'm always interested in. Will they change? There's all these rumors. Will they change the speed climbing route? When will they change it? How will that change? So I'm a little bit still, but used to be involved more with the IFSC, and I'm an internationally certified judge. So I've judged at Worlds and some other big events. Now that I've also coached the national team a couple of times, and now they're Olympic sport, the conflict of interest is really taken much more seriously. So you're like, oh, you coach the national team, or you might do that, go down to, Ecuador and do Pan Ams, and you cannot judge not only that event, but any event in like with a 2-year period or 4-year period, which makes sense. but getting some insight and information on that, there's a lot of discussion on formats and potential format changes, like what's going to happen with speed. And of course, the Olympics having the triple discipline, right, combined only, and then going down to speed and then boulder lead and double discipline. I think you're going to see that evolve too. I'm not sure where it's going to evolve to, but I think you're going to continue to see that evolve. I'd just be very interested to see where it goes. I know, for instance, where bouldering is now with the volumes and the sort of coordination problems and slabs, the kind of the difference from the power climbing where it was mostly 10 years ago is a neat evolution. I know Timmy Fairfield was really setting for the Asian X Games for about 7 or 8 years, maybe 10 years ago. And he was, if you look at those old tapes from the Asian X Games, it was fascinating. He was way ahead of the game in terms of coordination, dynamic, really making bouldering separate from rope climbing. In terms, he would use, holds on chains and standing on blocks to start the problem, all these, double overhead toe hooks and pull through and just really crazy stuff. And he really thought, it needed to go there for excitement. And it has gone in that direction, but not quite all the way there. So I'm interested to see how that will change too. And I think there's the push-pull on formatting between what caters to a grassroots level climber and what caters to the top end climbers and what's going to be used at World Cups and the Olympics. There's always a push-pull there too, because the formats right now are really geared toward the high-end climbers.
Related to that and the types of climbing, types of bouldering and whatnot, how do you see the facilities evolving as well? Because it's interesting, because if you go to a gym that opened in the early 2000s, in some sense, at least to some of us, probably some of our listeners, probably not others, but that doesn't seem like that long ago. And yet you look at those gyms and you can definitely tell, oh, this is a different era. And it's interesting too that your connections to First Ascent, because First Ascent, one of the gyms up there in Chicago, was the first gym that I ever went to that offered free Wi-Fi, and there was this space where you could just work. And I remember going to that gym, that First Ascent gym, and thinking, wow, they're really encouraging me to just hang out here after my climbing. And of course, that's where a lot of other gyms have gone. So looking ahead 5 years, 10 years, how do you see gyms as a space, what they offer and amenities and all of that? How do you see that changing or evolving?
I think you're exactly right. It is a community space that we want people to hang out in and make connections in. And the buzzword, for us in marketing and for the whole industry in marketing is community, but it's true. I mean, anyone who's a climber knows that there is a strong community of climbers, and that once you kind of become a regular, you just kind of slide into that community, and it's a very accepting community and a tremendous community. I love it. That's what roped me in 35 years ago and kept me. For people who don't understand it at all, I've always compared it to surfing. The surfing community is a very, very tight community too. And people who don't even surf kind of know, like, oh, surfers are surfers, right? And they do what they do in California, and they all hang out together and they all look the same. And, that's not true anymore either. It's obviously broadened a great bit in 30 or 40 years of surfing, but it's just a really tight community. And I think gyms are like our Arlington Heights, our newest gym, is 4 times the square footage floor space, the building of the gym you saw of Avondale downtown. And we only put, 3,000 or 4,000 extra wall square feet of climbing in that space. And it's a 40,000 square foot building. So it's like, it's almost the same amount of wall as Avondale, which is like 16,000 square foot building. So I think that's the trend. I think it will continue. And if you look at, European gyms and South American gyms and Sharma's gym, a lot of them even have, coffee shops and even bars, and liability is a bit different over in Europe. So you sit and have a drink afterwards, you're climbing. But I think that is the trend that will continue for a while, is to get larger spaces with less climbing. So there's more social and community space, and offer more kind of programming to encourage that as well. For me, I love that. But being into training and running team programs, there's always a bit of, I want to use some of that space for training facilities. So that's something you're seeing a lot more of too. Like, the moon board, what a great idea that Ben Moon had long ago. And it's still going strong. We have moon boards, but of course you have kilter boards, which we just bought 2 of, which are just fantastic. And tension boards and other training elements. I think that's going to continue as well. I think more specific training apparatus, again, with this more data-driven approach and more replicable kind of just systemized approach is going to be really useful for the high-end climbers. So I think that you'll probably see more of that in gyms, but also lots of this open space and more styles of climbing. The whole idea of, this has changed a long time ago. Any kind of real rock or built-in features is obviously gone. So you're seeing something that's much more aesthetically pleasing, kind of modern arty, feeling and pleasing. And that's even true with the holds, right? So you go in and you see what's on the walls and you have these large volumes, large feature holds, and you just see this piece of, art that just looks really interesting to climb. It's not just a scatter shot of tiny little blue blobs on the wall. It's something that's like, wow, that's really intriguing. I see that lasting for a while. I don't know where, it's just really fun and encourages people to climb.
I think back to an interview I did with Peter Mayfield, who was the founder of City Rock, one of the first gyms in the country in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is he said that he told me his whole formulation for that gym was he didn't want it to just mirror outdoor climbing in an indoor setting. He wanted it to be, I think his quote was, climbable art. That was the phrase he used. And we are seeing that in hyperdrive now with
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's been, a big change, but everybody building walls, 15, 20 years ago, everything looked like, I want to make this look like a cave. I'll make this look like American Fork, like Hell Cave and American Fork or something like that. And then they're like, no, I don't want to. That's only a climber would appreciate that. Anyone new to it is like, this is really horrible. This is not appealing at all. It's dark and dingy and everything is just, sandy, reddish brown or gray. And that's totally evolved into a different space. So when you walk into a gym now, it's like walking into a bit of this, cool, like modern museum of art or something. And it's just a really inviting space to be in. So in terms of all the open space too.
What is the future of First Ascent? What do you have in store in either the immediate sense or long-term?
Well, we're still recovering from COVID. All the gyms are. It's been a challenge, but we're coming back strong and it's going well. So Arlington Heights opened this summer, which is our biggest gym by far and beautiful. And we have hosted nationals there this summer, which was crazy. We weren't even open. We were soft open right before that. And then we came in and did nationals, all three events, which has never been done before with all three events in one gym. And then had our grand opening a week later with our members. So it was crazy. But we also have some other projects in development. We're looking to stay kind of in our general area. We feel like we understand the Midwest market well and are really connected to that. But we have some projects, I can't tell you about them right now, but some that are in the works. So we're always looking forward to the future and kind of making those connections and say when things actually, financially and at the right time and those developments are coming along, then it's the time to actually put a gym in or push that project forward. We look forward to doing that and expanding. There's a lot of opportunity in the Chicago market still, actually, but also around the close Midwest, something we can get to closely. We're looking at those as well. But Chicago is still really underserved. If you take a look at the demographics and the population and you compare it to something like Boston or Denver or other places, the amount of square footage of wall space in a gym wall space we have per person, especially if you look at the core demographic, is really low. It's still, 2 or 3 times less than some of these other markets. So I still think there's a lot of potential in Chicago as well.
This is great. I'd love to chat another time and get more into not only all of this, the future stuff, but get into some of the history, because I could sit and hear about Snowbird 88 memories forever.
God, the history is wild because it was, it's really fun to talk about. I mean, everything was just seat of the pants, just winging it. I mean, even for organizations like USAC or IFSC, it was just kind of winging it and just great stuff. And it's so professional now. I mean, and the people, like when we hosted nationals this year, the amount of resources that USAC brought, the number of people and the quality of people and the amount of full-time people and the knowledge they have was off the charts compared to thinking about some of the nationals I've been involved with. I used to judge a lot. So I judged the Planet Rock Nationals in the early 2000s where they didn't have good air conditioning and it was 110 degrees and people called the fire department and they emptied the gym in the middle of the finals round with 10 climbers on the wall and everyone had to leave and come back and things like that. And now it's so professional, and it's amazing to see. I mean, they're doing a really, really good job with that. And the people we worked with were fantastic. So those resources are nice. But back in the day, there were some wild accommodations that had to happen to make things work.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm a captive audience for all of this stuff. And yeah, I love your connection to the history, and I love kind of your vision for the future, even though as we said, maybe there are questions that can't be answered right now, but it's fun to speculate.
It's wide open. It's wide open. So I'm as intrigued as anyone else to see kind of how that evolves.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with Dave Hudson. If you enjoyed what you heard, check us out next time. We'll be back with another guest and another episode very soon. And also, word of mouth helps. So if you like this podcast, we're appreciative if you tell a friend or tell a coworker about it. We'll see you next time.